The sheer impact of the decisions like the one made today by the D.C. Circuit sets the agenda on the Hill, on the Trail, and in the email boxes of Donald Trump supporters the world over. It's unfortunate, but a reality nonetheless, that for a disgraced ex-president with a cataloged penchant for breaking the law, self-inflicted legal entanglements are a sort of jet fuel for the fundraising apparatus. Even today, shortly after the D.C. Circuit Court's decision, he turned legal defeat into political momentum, telling his supporters how all of this is proof that President Biden has weaponized the Justice Department. Joining our conversation now is NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard in Las Vegas following the Trump campaign. Here at the table, Democratic strategist and director of the public policy program at Hunter College, Basil Smikle. Claire's also back with us. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for being with us. Vaughn, let me just start with you, because this used to be, I mean, Donald Trump fundraises off of everything. It's kind of remarkable. But the hauls that he gets seem to be diminishing, or is that not a correct way to look at it?
I mean, they were able to pass over $50 million in money that could have been spent on political purposes in order to cover legal costs for him over the course of the last year, Ali. I think your question is a very fair one that we'll be looking at here in these last weeks as soon as we get even more FEC reports, because they, over the last year, have been repeatedly asking folks for donations to help cover legal costs. And, if anybody comes from any family, you kind of get used to questions about money, and how far is one willing to open up their purse strings is a question that Donald Trump is going to have to be continuing to ask himself, because through 4 criminal indictments, civil trials, and now multiple rulings, this latest here this morning from the appeals court, Donald Trump is, there's a lot on the line. There was a fundraising text that just came out earlier this afternoon in which he tells his supporters, folks, federal judges just ruled against me moments ago. Federal judges just ruled I have no presidential immunity. They won't stop until the MAGA movement is erased. Donald Trump is running as much of a legal fund for himself as he is a political campaign fund. Ali.
Yeah, in fact, I was talking to Claire about that earlier. In his post, he says, Basil, he's starting to say, save presidential immunity. He's starting a campaign about that. And, we joke about it, but these things sometimes work. It may work for Democrats to start to focus on those people who are moderates and maybe some conservatives about what this guy really is. We've got reporting at NBC News that a super PAC backing President Joe Biden plans to spend upward of $40 million starting in late spring, focusing on Donald Trump's mounting legal issues and his threat to democracy, an issue that Biden's campaign itself has so far avoided directly attacking. The idea is to try and amplify ads the group, called Unite the Country, feels are most likely to influence swing state voters who are moderate or conservative leaning and either anti-Trump or on the fence about the former president because of his 4 indictments, including 2 related to allegations that he tried to overturn the 2020 election. Look, Joe Biden leans into the democracy question a lot, but he stayed away from the legal question a lot.
Well, I think it's absolutely appropriate for him to lean into the legal questions, especially considering the decision today. If I could find a way to extricate the voter from all the other things that I am in my life, I imagine that there are going to be some voters, perhaps more independents than people who are definitely Republican or Democrat, that are just going to get tired of a lot of the legal language and a lot tired of trying to pay attention to the court cases. What Joe Biden is doing is say, pay attention, wake up. He's shaking the American public into making sure that they understand the weight of everything that's happening right now. And as you talk about the donations and why it's so interesting and important for Joe Biden to do this, what Donald Trump is doing is funding a political ministry. He's getting people to say, in this sort of old school telethon, how much have we raised today? Here are court cases that didn't go my way. How much can we raise today? That sort of political ministry for his supporters has to pay off in miracles at some point.
Right.
And it's not.
Right. It's because, as Vaughn says, it's paying off in paying Donald Trump's legal fees. I'm not quite sure what the return is. Claire, Chris Christie gave his first interview to ABC after dropping out of the presidential race, in which he articulated what he thought a second Donald Trump term would look like. Let's listen to what he said.
Mayhem. Absolute mayhem. At 16, he was scared. He didn't expect to win. And he was intimidated by the presidency when he first got there. He will not be this time. I think we have to take him at his word. This is going to be the vendetta presidency. This is going to be, I am your retribution. And I think he will use the levers of government to punish the people who he believes have been disloyal to him or to his approach.
Chris Christie puts it well, using Donald Trump's own language. Donald Trump has said, I am your retribution. Kash Patel has gone on TV and said, we're going to go after journalists. We're going to go after critics, civilly and criminally. This is the point that folks need to understand, that this is not going to be a normal presidency, even if your taxes will be low and your regulations will be cut down. We are handing over our democracy to a guy like Donald Trump, who's told us exactly what he will do to your democracy.
Yeah, and I think there's way too many Republican leaders who say, well, Donald Trump just uses hyperbole and he exaggerates and he won't be that bad. But he was pretty darn bad the first time around. And that's when he had people like secretaries of state and Bill Barr. I mean, Bill Barr was terrible until the very end, and he finally threw up his hands and walked away. And now he speaks the truth about how bad Trump was about trying to hold on to power when the voters had turned him out. But you look at all of his cabinet members, most of them have turned against him. There were guardrails. He is going to make sure there's no guardrails this time. And it is frightening. This is a man who's actually said, Ollie, he actually said, I'm going to terminate the Constitution. Now, can you imagine in America, we would think it's okay to put a guy in the Oval Office who said, I think the Constitution should be terminated? So I think Chris Christie's right. I think people need to be very worried. And I'm very worried because he has used both his criminal indictments to increase his poll numbers and to increase his fundraising. That is not a good sign.